Today, I'm going to go through how you can use Protolyst to organize and start writing your literature review. And there are 3 features that can help to streamline your literature review. First is the automatic extraction of citations when you add papers into your workspace. Second is that you can grab highlights from your papers, and these will automatically generate citations and references wherever you use them in your writing. And third is that you can create your literature review using a table which you can download as a Word document with references. So to kick off, here's an overview of what I'll be covering. So there's a few different stages in your research that you might actually write a literature review. So here I'm going to be assuming that you are familiar with your research project, in that you have a research question already defined. And in the planning, we'll approach this as coming up with some questions that you might want to answer through gathering information to write your literature review, as well as thinking about the overall narrative, kind of connecting those questions together. So I did a PhD, so I'll be using my PhD as a worked example. And then I'll go through collecting relevant information for those questions from papers, with a specific focus on how you can use Protolyst to help you organize and collect that information. Then I'll show you how you can start to use the info you've collected to get writing those different sections of your literature review, how you can piece those together and get that out of Protolyst. So let's start with planning out the contents of your literature review. So my research question or topic was fabrication of acoustically micropatterned coacivate-based hydrogels. Why a mouthful? As I'm very familiar with this project at this point, I know that there are some other kind of overlapping areas that I might need to explore. And one of the ways that you can start to do this is by looking at your title or research question and breaking it down into the different topics which are mentioned there. So in this title already, I've got, fabrication, working at the micro scale, acoustics, coacivates, hydrogels, and hydrogel systems. So that's kind of, I guess, almost the next level that I'm probably going to need to introduce and think about and have some questions that I answer for the reader. Throughout the literature review, I'm going to want to gradually pull them all together to land on my research question, being the topic and the gap that I'm evidencing in the literature as something that I then went on to research. I think what I might do first, working at the micro scale, as where I kind of start the literature review. So I think there's something interesting there around how we started to understand at the molecular level. I'm then going to talk about how we then moved on to thinking about systems. So I've added a few other questions in there, because I think that's where the discussion lies. So I think this is a reasonable kind of version 1. As you continue to pull your literature review together, you might iterate on this structure, you might add questions in, take them out. It's all very flexible, but as a starting point, I think that is good. So what I'm going to want to do now is go through the literature and grab relevant information from the papers I have already, go out and get others that will help me to build up, I guess, an information bank around these specific questions, which I can then use to start writing a few paragraphs in answer to those questions. Okay, so I've added those key questions into this table, and now what I can do is go and collect atoms from papers and start to label or connect them or tag them to these specific questions, so that I can have that little snippet of information to hand, which should help speed up writing that section as and when I get to it. So let's add some papers into the workspace. So I'm going to add a new table for the papers, and then I'm going to change this subpages property to a citation property. And then I'm going to drag and drop a batch of papers onto this table, and they will upload into the workspace and automatically extract some citations. And there's a few different styles that you can choose available here. And then we also have the atoms column, which is where any of the highlights that we capture as atoms will appear. So I'm actually going to open up the literature review in split screen, so control click, and that means I've got my kind of key questions that I want to gather information around to hand. So I can jump into any of these papers, and as I come across information which will be relevant to any of these questions, I can highlight it and then drag and drop it into the atoms column. And so that has lifted that piece of information out of the text and captured it as an atom. And there is a link back to this source, and it has also added a label to the atom here. And so I can continue reading through the source and gathering the bits of information that are relevant to any of these questions that I've put together as the structure of my literature review. And when I jump back to the table that I've uploaded all those papers into, that atoms column will display the atoms that I've captured from that paper as well. So I've been through some of those papers and collected information around the relevant questions. And so now I'm probably ready to have a bash at answering one of those questions with the information that I've gathered. So let's open up this one about the acoustic patterning techniques that have been developed. So each row of your table is a page in its own right. So if we open this up as a page, we can start typing into it. And we can have a list of all of the atoms we've collected by opening the atoms menu. And this will give us a list of all the atoms that we've collected, as well as a source link. So if as we come across one, we want to jump back to it and gather some more information or context, we can click on the source link. This allows you to get right back to exactly where in the paper you read that piece of information. And so I've just got a handful of atoms here. I imagine you would probably have way more, having gone through many more papers than I just did, but you can drag and drop the atoms that you want to use into the page. And it will automatically generate a citation next to that bit of information, as well as add a reference into the references list. This is a pretty speedy way of adding references into your writing. And so I've got the kind of key ideas already added in from the atoms with citations and references. So I can then rework the text into my version of that. That isn't plagiarizing and starts to tie some of that information together. And then you can work your way through each of these questions, gathering the information, then using that to write an answer to those questions. You'll start to be building your literature review piece by piece. When you've written each of the different sections, we can actually combine each of those sections into one full document and integrate all of the references that you've added by using a different table view. So if I go up here, I can create a different table view. It's the vertical type, lit review doc style. And this, I guess, transposes the table and stacks them all on top of each other. So we've almost got these like section headings and the information that's been collected. So we can change the properties, we can turn off the atoms, and we can turn on the page preview. And what that does is pull in everything that you've written in that particular page for that given question. So the answer that you've been working on and all the references that you've used will appear here. And you can download this going to the page options. And as you're writing, you can add new sections in, you can change the title of the sections, and you can reorganize those sections too. So it's very easy to reconfigure, and it will always update and integrate those references for you. So that's a bit of an overview as to how you can start using Protolyst to grab all the information to start writing your literature review.